Cool. Thank you very much for having us. So there have been quite a few very technical talks targeted on provider development, and we kind of thought we're gonna give you a little bit of a story of how we both got into Terraform Provider development, and some of us got massively carried away with that, and touch a little bit on the less technical topic of where to start, how to go. Two of us, me, Vladimir Lazarenko. I am currently a freelance technology enthusiast, basically helping large enterprises migrate into the cloud, adopt clouds, innovate on the cloud, save costs on the cloud, and so on and so forth. Aris?
Yes, I'm Aris. I'm a DevOps consultant or engineer, and also working on getting customers to the cloud. And I try to optimize for the system, not for the individual component. You can find me with the @Aristos handle on Twitter and on GitHub and everywhere.
Cool. So this is going to be a 10-minute slide for the people who do not know what Terraform is. Terraform is an awesome tool to automate your infrastructure deployment and lifecycle management with all the benefits of it, version control, faster speed, compliance, traceability, you name it. But I assume if you're all on this conference, which is HashiCorp Build, you probably know what we're talking about. So we'll move on.
Yes. Well, we're today talking about contributing to a Terraform provider, and probably most of you know it already where it's positioned, but for the ones who don't know that, you know probably the tool Terraform, or at least have heard about it. But between all the resources you can use within Terraform, there are plugins called providers, for instance, for Azure Cloud. And we are both contributors to the Azure Terraform provider, so we're going to talk about the experience with that. This talk is mostly about the experience with the Azure provider, but the generics of our talk are also applicable to other providers probably, and if not, probably people are happy to help you out with the specifics on their provider.
Cool. A little bit of self-bragging. Currently contracted by an international Fortune 500 company. Unfortunately, they do not allow me to name them. But we are basically an Azure shop. We work in data-driven innovation solutions, and with all the usage of data in the world, kind of became a hype recently, and a lot of new products are being brought out, also by Microsoft. Unfortunately, everything that's new, it's either in a preview mode, private preview mode, which basically does not allow us to use Terraform to provision those resources. So we just had to get into the development to be able to continue to be 100% Terraform shop. My first unsuccessful contribution to Azure Provider was about on June 17th, first successful one on June 30th. Since then, got carried away a bit, authored a bunch of PRs, not only to Azure Provider, wrote my own mini provider, contributed to HCL tools, new mini providers, and so on and so forth. Annoyed HashiCorp people so much that they recognized me as a HashiCorp core contributor of 2021. In Terraform space. Thank you for that. Very humble.
Yes, as for myself, I'm currently working for a company in the Netherlands. I'm part of a small team there, and that's also one of the reasons I started contributing. We are working on application development projects, mainly on Azure, at least our part of the company is. And my first contribution was on the 20th of January last year, and it was approximately 2 months after I joined the team, because we started using Terraform and we needed some extra features. My contributions in general are focused on application technologies, so to say, so app servers or AKS or the databases underneath it or some security things. And it's not to brag about it, but I think it's good to say that I introduced at least one bug per 10 PRs. It's not always a big bug, but there have been. I've blocked the AKS resource for a few releases, I think, in the past. But I think that's good to mention that it's also possible to make failures there as a contributor. And yeah, we overcome them and we fixed it as well. Last but not least, I wanted to mention a small tool. Because we work with Terraform and Azure a lot, we also have to move sometimes resources between subscriptions, and I built a small tool which can move the resources at the same time in your Terraform configuration and your Azure environment. I would advise using the dry run function first, so at least then you have a slight idea what it's going to do. And well, that's mainly my profile as a contributor.
Awesome. You. So as I mentioned, basically in my endeavors helping various different enterprises adopt the cloud, move to it, innovate in it, and so on and so forth, people very often want that shiny new thing that, you know, your cloud provider is just released and the Terraform provider doesn't yet support. Although Terraform does allow for majority of the resources, if some people want to live on the bleeding edge, they need to be able to deal with that bleeding edge as well. So there are a couple of ways one can deal with some shiny new thing that doesn't exist, which we've tried to illustrate here. You can basically log a new issue and just sit there and wait, as that nicely looking guy on the left is doing. Or you can raise a new issue, you know, do some coding, create a pull request, and do two things: be able to use it yourself and contribute back to the community.
Yeah, of course, it's not always necessary to contribute a whole new resource. Small improvements are always welcome, I think. But yeah, it's nice to contribute.
Definitely. So we've tried to list a few reasons to contribute here. I think, well, first of all, it's fun, and again, automate all the things, because if you are contributing by adding functionality, you are adding to the automation capabilities of the provider.
Yeah, and besides contributing to the community, it's always nice to learn a new programming language. I knew a bit of Go, but to really practice it, well, contributing helped me a lot there. And also, I must say, knowing a bit about the internals of the Terraform provider for Azure makes it a lot more easy to reason about the resources in Azure and all these things. That's definitely a pro to have.
Yeah, and then it's a very nice feeling when you're actually not an active open source contributor to get some of the stuff that you actually build, that it actually works, and, you know, work with the community, give back to the community, and, you know, improve the lives of people using the product. Yeah,
I think besides the list which we have written down here, I think I should also emphasize the well, so to say, soft skills. I think I learned a lot about communicating async on PRs, communicating humble, communicating direct, state what you want, but be humble and be nice. Yeah, these kind of things. It's hard to comprehend in a few sentences, but I think it's life experience also what you're getting out of contribution.
Yeah, I think I'll speak to the both of us when I say that in my collaborations with not only the Azure community and Azure part of HashiCorp, but also maintaining Kubernetes provider, the also doing some internal tooling and stuff like that. HashiCorp has a very warm community around everything Terraform. They're super welcoming to the contributors, so it's always a good idea to just try and do it. So where do I start? If you're thinking about contributing, but you do not know where to go or where to start, we try to kind of list a few things which you could consider beginning with. So one of them being contributing to the open issues or open PRs. So basically thumbs up. No Me Too comments, they are normally not really welcome, but those thumbs up, at least in Azure Teams experience, they are being used in somewhat prioritization of what needs to get worked on first.
Yeah, and that really helps also for me when I want to pick up an issue, then I always look at the thumbs up. But besides that, it's good to read the contributing or development section of the README. Well, if you've seen the talk Tom did, a lot of these kind of things are there already explained, or other details, how to generate certain stuff. You should definitely read it before you start with a real PR.
Yeah. So if you're planning to start with a real PR, it's usually a good idea to look through open PRs, one, to figure out whether somebody is already working on it or not. And otherwise, it can be a great way to start for the pointers of, I don't know, if you need to add a new parameter to a particular resource, there's probably plenty of pull requests that already have been merged or open in a review. And if you're going through them, it can give you a solid background information of what to pay attention to while writing a first contribution.
Yeah. Easy to pick up issues are always available. I think on the Azure provider, there are approximately 80 at the moment. Or to improve docs or examples, it's a good starting point to go through the process and learn how other people do it, or get used to the flow.
Yeah, on Azure Provider, you can find them by just filtering by label good first issue, literally like that.
Yeah.
Join any real-time collaboration spaces. As Tom has mentioned, in case of Azure Provider, we have a Slack. A link to that is available in the README of the provider. Most of the contributors are hanging out there. All of the maintainers are hanging out there. It's if you don't know where to start, if you want to attract attention to your PR or whatnot, it's a good place to be. Or just some technical cozy banter, rubber ducking, all that kind of stuff we all love to do.
Yeah, just hang out, be nice to other contributors and maintainers, just like their comments or whatsoever. It's good to be there.
So once you figured out what to do, here are a few things you could do. So in case of Azure Provider, and as we said, we mostly contribute to that, so it's a little bit Azure specific. You could upgrade service package versions. Azure SDK for Go has a date format versions. So basically, they release a new version of a particular service package every so often. And upgrading the service package version doesn't mean that you need to implement everything that service package brings with it, everything new, but it allows other people to actually work on that. So the actual process of upgrading a service package means you upgrade the version of a package you're importing, and then you basically need to make sure that all of the code-wise, like syntax changes, are corrected and so on and so forth. Ideally, you would also run acceptance tests, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. And that basically allows some other people to then later on pick up other stuff and implement new functionality to be able to automate it.
Yeah, besides upgrading, add some new functionality to an existing resource. I think it's easier than to start a complete new resource there. So yeah, that's a good starting point.
Yeah, fix bugs. Everybody's gonna love you for that.
Or if you are really up to the task, implement some new resources. Maybe not the best starting point, but if you really want to, we are always welcoming you to have a chat or do it in pairs, these kind of things. Yeah.
And then regardless of the point that we are mostly Azure focused, you could naturally contribute to any other HashiCorp open source ecosystem products, other providers, linters, I don't know, build pipelines. That's why it's open source. Anything goes, and from my experience, HashiCorp welcomes contributors anywhere.
Yeah, and have some fun. That if you don't enjoy it, maybe you shouldn't do it, but or you need that resource, of course, but yeah.
Cool. So to make it a little bit more technical, but just a tiny little bit, here's a very high level kind of checklist on how to implement a new Azure resource. So again, look through open PRs and issues. If anyone else is already working on it, you could potentially do the work in vain. And I'm honestly very bad at it. And when I need something, I just open IDE, start coding it, and then I submit a PR, and then Tom or Katie are like, yeah, there is already one open and in a review. And I'm like, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, if you want to contribute a resource, you should check if there's support in the SDK in the SDK for Go, if there's support for it. Otherwise, it's quite hard to implement the resource, and then you are basically ready to go to start.
Yeah, and then you basically fork the repo, and one of the easiest way to start code-wise is actually steal some code that's already working and adjust it up to the point that it actually works the way the way you want it to. So to give an example, if you have a resource which looks fairly similar in the parameters and arguments and something like that, instead of typing it all from scratch, just copy some other resource and modify it up to the point that it actually does what you want to do.
Yeah, don't forget the documentation for the new resources. And I think that it really depends on what you're implementing. But if I'm implementing a small resource, I start with writing acceptance test, and then check if it doesn't work, and then upgrade the resource and run the acceptance test again until it works. But that depends really on your workflow. And we must say, if you want to run acceptance tests, make sure you know approximately what you're doing, because it can cost a lot of money. Yeah, that's definitely something you should know beforehand. If it's just a small resource, if it's the resource group, for instance, what Tom demoed today, then it's almost for free. But if it's a huge cluster of some kind, it will cost you some money.
Yeah, the acceptance test, they literally create resources in Azure, so you really need to keep that in mind before, I don't know, your credit cards runs out or your manager is going to be asking questions.
Yeah.
What we've learned during our journey of becoming contributors, well, for one, just give it a go. I'm 99% positive you're going to like it, but if you're not going to like it, nobody's going to force you.
Yeah, and ask questions. I mean, if you don't ask it, you will never get an answer probably. And I already said it, we are really happy to help as well, and available on Slack as well. If we are not available, you'll not get an answer, but probably within a day or two, we'll at least let you know if we are available for something.
Yeah, so when, as we already said, joining Slack is more or less a must. And the community around providers is really, really nice. Really, really nice place to be.
Yes, a few gotchas. What we wish we would have known prior to starting. Vlad, you want to take off?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I experienced by myself, and that was my first unsuccessful contribution. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Start with smaller tasks. When I decided to make my first contribution, it was implementing a new resource. It was a dedicated event hub cluster. It was a massive preview feature. One of the things which actually costed us a ton of money for running acceptance tests, because you can destroy that beast 4 hours after its inception, which incurs around $4,000 of cost for every test you run. That I kind of didn't know. And the complexity, the sheer complexity of that resource kind of made it for a very difficult review. I think Steve and I went about, I don't know, 30 iterations, and then we decided to ditch the whole thing and start again.
Yeah, so maybe the message is that if you want to implement something really complex, it's good to pair in an early stage with someone who wants to help, or ask around if someone is available. For instance, I exchanged email addresses with someone, and the next day I was on a Zoom call implementing a machine learning cluster resource. It's that easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say expect your first review to have a significant number of comments. I mean, if you're new to Terraform Provider development, but not new to Go, it's probably going to be a little bit easier. If you're both new to the Golang as well as Terraform Provider, it's probably going to be harder. Do not get discouraged. I mean, quality of code is important. We are working on an open source product with hundreds of contributors. Quality of code is important, period.
Yeah, and it might take a few iterations before it's really as great as we want our code to be, and use it as a learning moment. I mean, I also look sometimes at reviews on other ones, PRs, because yeah, I don't know a lot of stuff as well, even if I've contributed already a lot. Yeah, there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, and I think this is the fourth time I see Slack on our own slides, for which I apologize, but we cannot stress enough. Interact with the community, and you will be set up for quite a lot of fun and successful, productive contributions. That's basically all we had, and thanks everyone who was listening to us. Well, my contact details are here. Aris's as well. If you want to get in touch, please do.
Yeah, feel free, and thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you both for sharing that. This is the exact kind of session that I think we all need, because it's scary to start an open source, right? Like, you see this repository, there's 1,000 issues in there, and you're like, which one should I grab? And even if you filter by good first issue, it's still like, but what? You know? So thank you for sharing this experience. It's been very helpful. You made a call out to say, you know, I was a bit of a nuisance, and eventually people started recognizing me. Definitely not the case. Steve pointed out that you are definitely not a nuisance and that it is very appreciated that you contribute. And that's not just for you two, it's for all of our contributors. No matter if you're adding a new resource or data source, or just changing something as simple as a missing period or fixing the type of an item in the documentation, it's a useful contribution. Because if you ran into it, probably somebody else ran into it as well. So definitely keep doing that. And Vlad and Aris, thank you for offering your time so willingly to our community and making a call out to the Azure Slack to get people together. Definitely great. Mary, do you have any questions for our speakers?
Yeah, I would love to know. So this is directly relevant to the product that I work on, since we essentially have the same problem. So my question is sort of, how did you, I know you talked about how you started, but what led you to wanting to contribute instead of just, you know, opening issues and waiting to see what the rest of the community was doing?
For me, I think it's curiosity. I want to know how it works. I'm an engineer, kind of. And well, I don't want to wait too long. I want to get fixed. And if it's easy, and the start was really easy. I think it was like a 4-line contribution or so. Yeah, then why not? I mean, I think it's also a mindset, kind of.
Yeah, for me, it was mainly, yeah, I'm impatient. I am pushing the company I'm working for 100% infrastructure as code. And when you're hitting the wall of something not being supported, yeah, you just go out there and do it.
Wonderful. I have one last question, which is, how did you go about getting your pull requests flagged for review so that they were noticed by the Azure team?
Go tag Tom in Slack. No, don't do that. But no, seriously, the Azure Slack has a contributors channel. Basically, it might help if you just paste the link in there without tagging people. Other than that, I know that a lot of maintainers and people who are able to review PRs are looking at them on nearly daily basis. But if you feel that your particular contribution feels completely abandoned, again, Slack's the place to be.
I think these are great tips. Sorry for interrupting you, Mary.
Oh, no, I was interrupting you. I was just saying thank you because I thought these were great answers and really helpful tips as well.
Absolutely. Thank you both. That's all we have for you two. Now we're going to switch to our next speaker. If you've been following along with the schedule, you might expect a different session, but let's be honest, nobody has time to check a schedule once the event kicks off. I mean, there's been so much good stuff. Learning how to be a contributor, not just on a code level, but also on a, the social level. It's super amazing.